This episode is based on the case of Chris Watts. You want to hear something genuinely unsettling? Some people don't become emotionally dangerous loudly. Sometimes they slowly disconnect internally while everything on the outside looks completely normal. I think that's what makes this story so unsettling. Because when I started reading about the case of Chris Watts, the part that stayed with me wasn't just the murders, it was how ordinary his life seemed right before everything collapsed. From the outside, he looked like a normal husband, normal father, quiet guy. Family photos, birthday parties, videos with the kids, suburban life. Nothing about it immediately gives you the feeling that something horrifying is sitting underneath it. And maybe that's the part people struggle with the most psychologically. The fact that somebody can appear emotionally present while internally becoming completely detached. Apparently, before everything happened, people around Chris described him as calm and passive, not explosive, not emotionally intense, and I think stories like this feel more disturbing when the person doesn't match what people expect danger to look like. Because most people imagined emotional collapse looking obvious, visible anger, violence, chaos. But emotional detachment can look incredibly quiet from the outside. According to investigators in interviews surrounding the case, Chris had apparently become emotionally involved with another woman before the murders. And while reading about this story, I kept thinking about how psychologically strange it is when somebody starts mentally separating themselves from their own life before physically leaving it. Apparently, while his family still believed life was continuing normally, something internally had already disconnected. Emotional detachment is terrifying precisely because it's so difficult to see while it's happening. One thing that really stayed with me while reading this case was how ordinary the final days seemed. Text messages, conversations, daily routines. That's what makes it feel eerie. Nothing around him seemed to fully realize what was building underneath the surface. At least, not to the extent it actually was. And honestly, I think human beings are psychologically wired to assume familiarity means safety. We trust routines. We trust normalcy. We trust the people we see every day, which is why stories like this feel so deeply unsettling afterward. Emotionally, it almost feels impossible to understand how somebody could continue acting normal while internally planning something horrifying. Maybe that's exactly why this case became so disturbing to so many people, because it forces people to confront the possibility that emotional emptiness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind routine, behind politeness, behind ordinary behavior. In 2018, Chris Watts reported his pregnant wife, Shanann Watts, and their two daughters missing from their Colorado home. But almost immediately, people watching interviews began noticing something emotionally strange about his behavior. Not panic, exactly, not grief the way people expected it, just distance. Honestly, I think that's what makes this feel so dark psychologically, is how emotionally empty parts of it seemed afterwards. Wasn't explosive rage. This is not chaotic violence. Just somebody apparently deciding their existing life had become an obstacle standing in the way of the life they wanted instead. That's an incredibly disturbing thing to think about, because it transforms family from emotional connection into inconvenience psychologically, right? And once human beings start emotionally disconnecting from people that deeply, the absence of empathy can apparently become very dangerous. The more I sat with this case, the more it stopped feeling like a story about anger and started feeling like a story about emotional disappearance. Like somebody quietly detached internally long before anyone around them realized it. And maybe that's what people find hardest to accept about cases like this. It's the realization that emotional darkness doesn't always feel dramatic while it's growing. Sometimes it grows silently. There's something so deeply unsettling about the idea that a person can continue smiling, continue talking normally, going to work, and living everyday life while mentally becoming emotionally disconnected enough to destroy the people closest to them. Because most people want to believe they would notice, that there would be signs, that danger would feel obvious. But stories like this challenge that belief completely. And honestly, I think that's why this case stayed in people's minds for so long. Not because it felt monstrous in a cinematic way, because it felt frighteningly ordinary to right up until it wasn't. And I'm curious what you think about this. Do you think that people can slowly become emotionally detached enough to stop feeling connected to the people closest to them? Or do you think that signs of that kind of darkness are always there, even if nobody notices them in time?